Hello watercolor lovers, welcome to my YouTube channel Watercolor Impressions. This reference was taken at a small town in Ontario called Hansville. The Harbourside overcast weather with the ship wanted me to capture this mood. The reflection of the ship and cloud also complemented scene even further. I also recommend if you're ever in Ontario, go and check this town and it has its own beauty. Before we get on to it, hit the subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And let's get started, guys. Check the video description for the drawing template so you guys can download it and follow with me. So let's start with the first wash. So the first wash should be really light. So for the first wash, I'm using a little bit of neutral tint, a little bit of white paint in it, and I'm using a lot of water in it because I want to create this grayish tone in our sky. Since we are doing Harbourside overcast scene, so we require a lot of neutral tints in our scene. Before it dries out, I'm going to take a pure pigment of neutral tint. I'm just gonna paint from top to the bottom. And you could see it just creates this beautiful haze in our clouds. That's a wonderful thing about watercolors. It paints by itself. Once I'm happy with the clouds, I'm going to take a little bit of Winsor violet and a lot of water in my brush, and I'll start from the midground and I'll just keep building up the pigment. So I'm making sure to collect the bead, so that will give a softer transition for our water. So the first transition, I'm using Cobalt Blue. So as soon as it comes down, I'm going to introduce Winsor violet. And I'm going to build up the pigments even darker using Winsor violet and French Ultramarine blue. And you can see I'm also using neutral tint, a pure pigment of neutral tint, and I'm just doing dark reflections on the water. And it looks utterly dark, but it will make sense once it dries out. So I'm also taking, since I have a lot of neutral tint in my brush, so I'm trying to create waves here and there. Once I'm happy with the impressionistic waves, I'll just keep building up the pigment till the midground. And once I finish the water, I kind of felt that there is not a softer transition from the midground to the foreground. So I'm taking a clean water. So I'm starting from the background to the midground, so it will give softer transitions for our water. So this is my secret technique, the beautiful tissue paper. So I take a tissue paper and I dab here and there and take some of the paint from my painting. So what this does is it gives the illusion of reflection of clouds on our water in the foreground. It also creates a beautiful lead-in for our painting as well. Let's start the trees, and let's start from the foreground. And for the trees, I'm using Cerulean Blue and a little bit of Cadmium Yellow in it, so it gives different varieties of green in it. And I do have gradient in my palette, so I will just use it after I finish my first wash. So as you can see, in reality, the trees look super dark in our reference, but let's have some color variation so that complements our scene. I'll start building up the pigment now, so I'm making sure that I'm not running out. So I mixed Cerulean Blue and Cadmium Yellow. I'm looking at the shape in our reference. I'm making sure to do that, and I'm taking it all the way from the foreground to the midground and to the background. And I'm also leaving some highlights for the house, which is in the midground. I'm also being aware of the boats, which is in the foreground as well, so I'm making sure to leave some highlights for it as well. And as it goes to the background, I want to have a softer trees there, so that it gives the illusion of atmosphere as well as depth in our painting. I'll just keep building up the pigment until I'm happy with it. So once before it dries out, I'm gonna take French Ultramarine blue and a little bit of neutral tint in my brush. And I'm just going to add those darker pigments at the bottom of the trees. So that will create a little bit of 3D in our trees, and it also creates a gradient from top to the bottom. So it also gives the illusion of light as well. And as you can see, once I add the darker pigment, the house which is in the midground also popped up as well. But as it goes to the background, I'm going to introduce a lot of cooler colors because cooler colors tend to go far and the warmer colors tend to come forward. So I'm being aware of my colors and I'm just keep building it up until I'm happy with it. And there are certain shapes I'm not happy with it, so I'm just tightening up here and there at the top. Now let's focus on the objects which is in the foreground, the small house and as well as the ticketing center. I just realized after I finished that painting, I just realized I should have left the house, the little house, to be white. But since I want to frame that house, so I'm going super dark at the bottom of the house as well as the ticketing center as well. And since I have the darker pigment in my brush and since our canvas is wet, so I'm going to introduce those darker values here and there. So once I'm happy with it, now let's focus on the ship which is in the foreground. So I want to start with the lightest value. For the lightest value, since I have Payne's gray in my palette, so I'm making sure I'm using a lot of water and keep it light. But as it comes to the bottom of the ship, and there's a darker decals which is at the bottom, so I'm making sure to add that. And I'm taking a light wash of Payne's gray. So this is just to this wash is just to see like where the details go. So I used cadmium orange for the steam missile. Hopefully that's what it's called. I don't know that much about boards. I would be lying if I know it. So I went ahead and finished my first wash. So once it dried out, I added the details after. So for the details, I usually use a pure pigment of Payne's gray in my brush, and I'm also using a brush which is thinner in shape. Now it's a matter of squinting our eyes and checking if the values are in our board, because for our board is our focus point. So I want to make sure that the values are really good and also read 3D and not looking as a flat shape. And there is also a dog. So for the dogs, which I want to anchor on the water, so I used a neutral tint, a little bit of yellow ochre in it to get the darker value. And I also added the stairs, and there's also a shadow happening on the side, so I'm also added that as well. And even the bottom part of the board, which kept really weak, so I glazed over again with neutral tint. And I'm also adding other details so that it also gives a shape to our board as well. And I squinted my eyes, and there's also darker pigment on the roof of our board, so I'm also adding that as well. And there is also a black shape which is in the front of the board, which is floating, but it will make sense at the end when I add the white paint on it. And I also have orange paint in my brush, so I also glazed over it again on the steam whistle as well. So now let's focus on the people in the foreground, and the person who is in the foreground walking towards the ticketing center, I gave him a cadmium yellow in the brush. So I also added the cadmium yellow everywhere as well. And now I'm taking white paint, and I'm also bringing back some of the highlights which are missed during our wash. And you could see I'm adding the mid-ground details now just by using white paint as well. And as well as the houses which is in the foreground as well. Now I'll add some details for the second figure who is walking next to that person. Even though in the reference there is only one person walking, I thought it would be nice to have a partner for him. So let's do some reflections on our water, and doing reflections in water is in watercolors is super easy. And this could be a magic or it could be a disaster, and let's see what we get. And I'll wet the paper from mid-ground to the foreground. So now I'm taking Payne's gray and a little bit of Winsor violet in it, and I will just keep building up the reflections for the boat as well as for the docks and for the house and the trees which is reflecting on the water. But as it comes to the foreground, I'm also going to reflect the steam vessel which is reflecting on our water as well. But I'm going a little bit quite a darker pigment in the foreground, so that gives a little bit of lead in. And so since my mid-ground is a little bit weak, so I glazed over it again, and I'm keep building up the pigment and making sure that reflection is running from mid-ground to the foreground. So I'll keep doing that till I'm happy with it. And I also noticed that in the foreground I want to have a transition from the foreground to the background, so I also glazed over with Winsor violet in the foreground as well. Then I'm going to repeat the process with Payne's gray and Winsor violet. And I'm also taking a clean brush, and I also want to have some lights peeking through in the reflection as well. And you can't cover everything in our water reflections. And there's also a pole which is reflecting on the water, which is in the mid-ground, so I'm also doing that. And since I have Payne's gray in my brush, so I'm also creating a darker pigment underneath the boat as well as the dark, because that helps to anchor the objects on the water. So there's also a darker reflections on the boat, so I'm also adding that. And I'm taking clean brush and I'm also doing zigzag lines, so it gives like a distortion feeling in the water reflection as well. Yeah, once I'm happy with the reflections, I'm going to jump on to adding some more details for the eyelets, which I missed during our wash. So I'm going to take white paint, so I'm going to bring some of the eyelets back as well. And there is also the ticketing center, which is also reflecting on the water. I thought it would be quite nice to reflect that as well. So I'm taking white paint. So from first I'm going to start with the mid-ground. You could see there's a house and there's also some boats here and there. I'm adding that. And there's also 3 white poles which is in the foreground with flags in it. I made it 4. And when I made the stroke, I wasn't happy with it. So I took tissue paper and I got rid of it. But even though it's white, you can also do it dark, because it also acts as a really good skyline as well. But I want to have a contrast, so I'm going to go white, then I'm going to add a little bit of a darker tone for the flags. You could see I'm having quite a struggle with that pole, so keep building it up once I'm happy with it. So now I'm going to add some details for the boats. For the boats, I lost a lot of details, so the white paint will bring back the depth in our boats as well. And there's a lot of things which are happening in our reference, you could see, and I'm adding the top details first, and I'm also adding like the windows as well. And you could see I added darker pigment before, so once I add the white paint, it makes sense with shadows. And I'm also adding the details which is in the front, so you can see once we add the eyelets back in our boat, everything comes in place. So usually in watercolors, you wait for adding eyelets at the end, because that's the easiest way we can do it, because that's how watercolor works. And if you respect watercolors, it respects you. And I also saw that the 2 people who was in the foreground are not reflecting on the water, so I thought it would be nice to have the details in that water as well. Even the pole got a little bit lighter, so I'm adding that as well. And I'm also adding some details in the boat as well, to have some variations in our reflections. And I'm taking clean water, I'm just reflecting the distortion in our water as well. Now let's add the good old cadmium flag. So for the flag, I'm using cadmium red and a little bit of cadmium orange in it. I made 2 lighter and 2 darker, so we can have contrast. And that's it, folks. And we are almost at the end of our painting journey. I thought like in the foreground everything looked flat, so I wet the paper in the foreground. So I'm going to introduce a little bit of darker pigment, so it will lead us into the painting. So I'm using Winsor violet and Payne's gray in it, and a little bit of French ultramarine blue to get some colors in it. And that's it, folks. Thanks again for watching this video tutorial with me. If you're an artist or a person who enjoys moody paintings, I created a playlist especially for you guys. Please feel free to check it out. Let me know what you learned from this video and what's your favorite color in this painting. If you have any other requests or subjects you want me to cover in watercolors, let me know in the comments or write me at watercolorimpressions@gmail.com. Thanks again for watching this tutorial. Please hit that subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And please do share with your friends and family. And good luck with your painting, folks.